Please give me some help in welcoming Sal Seguin, where he's talk about tethered management of iOS devices.
Oh, you crazy kids. I'd like to thank Charles and Rachel from Jamf for, first of all, inviting me here and accommodating me and making such a wonderful experience for my first Jamf Nation experience. And I thought I'd bring something that everybody should put in their back pocket and just put on the shelf, know how to do, a really easy solution that sooner or later crosses everybody's desk. And today I'm going to walk you through a process of how to create this solution. I guarantee you will understand all the details by the end and you'll be able to do it yourself quickly. And it's very powerful. To tell you, I had a question from Matt in the hallway. He was asking me about how this whole thing started. And so I'm going to tell the story about how all of this came about. I was in Cupertino at City Center 2, and I'm walking down a hallway, and I run into Todd, who's the engineering manager for Apple Configurator and a bunch of other tools as well. And I said, well, congratulations on the new tool, and what's your automation story on that? What do I need to know about this? And he says, well, we have this command line tool. And I said, okay, that's it? There's no scripting? There's nothing else on top of that? And he goes, yep, that's it. And I said, okay, let me look at it and see would you be open to if I could provide some extra tools for that? And he goes, oh, absolutely. So I started working on an AppleScript Objective-C library that wrapped this command line tool, and then I was adding Automator actions that talk to this library. And about 2 weeks later, I'm over at the Executive Briefing Center, where Apple brings in customers from around the world, and they present them their products, and they answer their questions and their concerns, and they get feedback and everything. Big process. They usually have like 5 different theaters going simultaneously, and in between those rooms are like engineering rooms where they are frantically trying to reset iPads by hand. Because each one of these meetings, they expect to be able to hand out these iPads and then in between sessions, wipe them clean and do something new. And my friends Todd Daly and Graham King were in there. And I'm watching them, and I said, you can't automate this? And they said, no, there's no way to automate. We can get here and here, but we can't automate the whole process. I said, well, I'm working on a library for Apple Configurator. Maybe we can figure this out on how to automate a process that makes it easy to reset a device and you guys can go meet the customers instead of hanging out in a room for an hour. And so Graham and I went into his office and we whiteboarded what became the set of Automator actions that ship with Apple Configurator today. And the whole strategy was based on a very simple concept that every human being understands. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So now you got the backstory. Nobody's ever heard the backstory. Now you have the backstory. Okay, click. For some, pardon the picture, Jamf likes to have the picture. I've never done a slide deck where I'm featuring me, but that's me. I am a consultant, automation consultant. I contract with different companies like Omni and Apple to provide solutions. I've spent 20 years at the Fruit Company as a product manager for automation. And today, like I said, we're here to talk about a solution to a management problem that everybody could deal with. And it's called Tethered Management of iOS Devices. And our agenda today is to create a standalone Mac that when you plug things into it will automatically refresh those devices, apply profiles management, whatever else you need it to do. But the act of plugging it in is all you need to do, or all your staff needs to do. So to do that, we're going to need a Mac. It can be any kind of Mac, something preferably new and has enough oomph to doesn't turn the fans on all the time. Maybe a Mac Mini or a used computer. We'll need some tethered iOS devices. And by tethered, I mean, we'll need the lightning cables. So we're going to be using lightning cables. We're not going to be using Wi-Fi for this. And the whole process requires that the end user, the person that plugs that in, that's the only interaction that they need to do. And for you, as the developer of this solution, it's going to be very simple and require no code on your part. And so you're going, oh, no code? Well, that sounds interesting. Tell me about that. I deal with a lot of Macs and stuff, so tell me, why do I need to set up a Mac and make this thing work with iOS devices? Well, we all know that in today's mobile-centric world, there's no real situation where you don't have iOS devices involved in what you do. At some point, even if you're only focused on Macs, there's going to be those devices come across, and you're going to have to create some kind of solution for them. And this is a great way to deal with that. Being able to manage iOS devices from a Mac is a handy tool that you can put in your toolkit. And the best part is that you can use the tools of macOS to handle the management of the iOS device for you. And that's what we're going to look at today, is how to manage iOS devices using Macs. So let's talk a little bit about, let's review the typical management strategies or deployment strategies for like an iOS device. There's a thing called one-to-one, and in one-to-one, each person is assigned their own little iOS device, and no matter where they move within the organization or even globally, that device stays with them. That's their device, it's profiled for them, it's set up for them. And that's called a one-to-one deployment. We've all heard that. But there's a category called shared use that is a very large category and growing. And in this, the device is really more like an appliance, and staff use the device, but then when they're done with that, they pass the device to the next shift, who passes the device to the next shift. And that's really the two scenarios, the two primary scenarios for dealing with deploying devices. You have one-to-one and shared use. And if we look at shared use, it's a very common thing, and you might not think about how common this scenario is. Common scenarios are like in healthcare, wellness fields. You might go to a doctor's office or to a hospital, checking in, receiving information, viewing documents, viewing your x-rays, those kind of things happen on iOS devices. And they're really used like appliances. They're not personalized or anything. That's a common deployment. There's plenty of hospitals in the United States that deploy thousands of iPads in the hospital for patients and for staff. Then in retail, both in like the hospitality industry, in retail, where you have a staff member that has an iOS device that has the ability working the floor to access all the information about their product line and what you need to make orders, to make reservations for you, to book a room or whatever you need to do, the mobility of that is commonly used in the retail marketplace. And you'll see a lot of that, and it keeps growing and growing. Another one is in professionals. For example, law firms, a lot of portable devices. First responders, it's amazing. Police carry their own iOS devices with them. And so does the fire department. And a lot of first responders carry mobile devices that are designed for them to use to communicate and to reference material and send in data quickly. Also in the restaurant business, everybody's gone into restaurants now where you interact with an iPad, or the server will come up with an iPad and you'll interact that way. So that's very common to see. Construction, I've seen a lot of people using iPads in construction because you have to reference so much blueprint and structural information from architects that it's very common for people to carry those kind of devices with them. So all of these are like shared use devices. And also, in classrooms where resources might be constrained, it's common to have iOS devices that are shared among the students. And a new category that's growing is in rental and loaner kiosks. You see this quite often. Christopher Sweet had a session the other day, and he was talking about, he's from Iowa State, and how he set up a kiosk so that students could come by and get devices when they need them in emergencies or for support. But this is a common practice now too. Instead of taking your computer with you to class, you might just walk up, swipe your student card, pull out an iPad, go into the lecture, take notes, upload to Dropbox, come back and slide that back into the slot. So more and more you're starting to see this shared use scenario happen. Now, with one, as far as device management software, with one-to-one, Apple had DEP and VPP, and it's all been exposed now and wrapped into their portals of Apple Business Manager and Apple School Manager. But for shared use, they rely on a piece of software that is free. You can download. It's called Apple Configurator. And the interesting thing about Apple Configurator is that it's quite often used with hardware devices like this Bradford D20 here that I have at home too, that where you plug in 20 or 40 iPads or phones or whatever you want, and you manage them using a Mac tethered to these pieces of hardware. It's very common practice to see that happen in companies, and a lot of companies have parts of their organization where this goes on that you might not be aware of. Even though they have one-to-one deployment elsewhere, there might be sections of the company where this happens. And the interesting thing about Apple Configurator, it's a very visual program. It's designed to be used interactively. You select big icons and you can see data about it, and you can set the apps and the profiles, get information about it, even view a console of live interaction between the device. And they have a menu of common commands that handle just about everything you need to do with a particular device. So sitting at your desk or sitting in front of a computer using Apple Configurator, it's easy to control and manage devices. But it assumes that you have a level of knowledge about things like, well, you know what the difference between restore and erase, you know how to supervise, you know what entitlement is, you know what profile is, you know who owns the document, that kind of thing. And these are common topics that are assumed that you know before you sit in front of that application. And for people like yourselves and your staff, that's no problem. For the IT whiz, that's easy to do. But many IT professionals are surprised to find out that the people who actually are charged with managing these devices don't know anything about all of those issues. They have no knowledge about ownership and MDM and processes and things like that. For them, they are the accidental administrators. Every organization has them. Bob retired, or during the reorg, he got moved to a different position. And then suddenly, Jane is charged with 24 iPads that Bob was taking care of. And Jane doesn't know anything about this. She doesn't know how to manage that. So the challenge for you as the go-to person in the company is, how can you create a solution for these people that they can use that will provide them the ability to manage those devices with all the stuff that the company needs on there? And that's what we're going to be talking about today, and that's what you're going to learn how to do. And fortunately, Configurator works with automation. It has built-in Automator support. So using the Automator support in Apple Configurator, you can easily create like a workflow that does a whole series of process of erasing a device, formatting it, supervising it, preparing it, all those kind of things. And you create an automation recipe, basically with different individual steps that run from the top down and pass the data between each action. And that's the principle behind that. So using Automator, you can quickly make a particular workflow that solves a problem. And then it's just a simple matter of you can save that workflow and put it into the scripts folder and the user library folder. And when you do that, it automatically becomes part of the system-wide automation architecture. And then your accidental administrators, all they have to do to manage your device is they just take the device, they plug it in, go to the menu, choose the workflow that you've created for them. The device gets processed, erased, everything it needs to be done, and voila, you have happy accidental administrators. So this is an easy way to provide a simple solution for some of these people. If they don't require a complex solution, this is a way to provide an easy solution. And by default, Automator and Apple Configurator come with a large variety of different Automator actions that provide functionality for management. And if you need to customize, you can interject like the run AppleScript action or the run JavaScript action or the run shell script action that has access to all the standard shells in Python and Ruby, and you can pass variables as standard iners, arguments, what you want. So you can interject and put these actions inside of the workflow to customize it more to what you need. Then you can create this simple solution. But the problem with the simple solution is we look at our audience, some of those people don't have time to get in front of a computer. Sometimes the computer's not even near them. You know, a nurse on the floor in a hospital doesn't have time to go over and sit in front of a computer. They have time to take the device, sanitize it, wipe it, and plug it into a rack. So we need another type of solution for these people that are the active people who don't have time to go to a particular computer and set things up. And for them, the answer is right in front of us. It's attachment. Refreshing on attachment. Have it so that when the device is plugged in, that triggers this automation workflow and then processes the device. So, that means nurse in hospital can take the device, sanitize it, walk into the room, plug it into the rack. You know, the airline staff that supports the pilots and the staff in the air can take the devices, plug it in, and it works. The people in retail can go to the back room, grab a device when the light's on, plug in another one, go back out on the floor. So this is a very powerful thing. The act of plugging something in is a universal thing that all humans understand, or all modern humans who've been trained over the last 100 years understand. Plug it in, it'll work. So let's look at what's involved in making an attachment scenario. There's a couple elements we're going to look at. We're going to look at Apple Configurator. What do we need to do with it? What kind of workflow can you create for this scenario? Content caching. What about, the content that we're going to be putting on this could be rather large. Is there a way to optimize the transfer of that data? Device management. We're at a device management symposium here. How does that fit into this scenario? And finally, I get to make my own acronym, TRC. It's a tether response chain, man. It's so cool. And I'll show you what that is. And that's basically how do you trigger this whole thing. You create a tether response chain. I was creating a tether response chain the other day, and I came across this. So let's look at device management. Now, for device management, I actually found software that is better than Jamf Pro. I'm sorry, I'm grateful to Jamf Pro for bringing me here and everything, but I have to be honest to my constituency here. I found for this scenario, I found a piece of software that is absolutely killer for device management, and it is Jamf Now. So for my example solution to you, I'm not going to try to make this zero touch and everything else. I'll leave that up to you later on. I just want to show you the concept. So we're going to use Jamf Now, which is a great piece of software. I really like it. The first time I used it, I just looked at it and I figured out what to do. You go to this login thing, you set up a simple account. Doesn't cost you anything. Good way to experiment and try your stuff out first, right? Don't have to spend a lot of money to try this out. So you go to login, you put in your name and your password, you click the button, and you're pretty much logged in. And then on the side, they have this thing for devices. And when you click that tab, all of your devices will appear as icons in the window. Then there's blueprints. Blueprints are preset scenarios that you can apply to a device. So instead of doing the 20 steps to set up a device a certain way by hand, you just apply a blueprint to it. It's like an outline, right? Blueprint. Then there's also something called open enrollment. And I really like this. I thought this was perfect for my scenario. And what it lets you do, it lets the user log into a web page and set this whole thing up. So my simple example to you is going to use open enrollment. Now, to turn on open enrollment, you select it, and then over on the right-hand side, there's a very light checkbox. So the UI guys might want to make that a little darker and move it over the left. Anyway. So we're going to select the checkbox to turn on open enrollment, and then you're going to provide an access code. I just made up a code, put it in this slot, put it in a Post-it note, put it on your computer screen. That's security. So then I'm going to turn this on. It will say, hey, device enrollment is turned on. And the thing it will provide you that you have to pay attention to is this an enrollment link. This is a unique link for your account. So that this is the link that you're going to have automatically show up on the device when it gets refreshed. Now, if I click the blueprints, by default, there's a default blueprint applied to devices. And if you click the blueprint, you can see that it has all the different categories about management. Anything that you need to manage with the thing for security, email, Wi-Fi, all of that, you can go through these and make the changes to the default blueprint to make it any way that you want. You can even do like set the wallpaper. So here I'm going to use Automator in my example to set the wallpaper for the iPad to our friend Otto. And that's basically all we need to do with our device management. So naturally, again, I'll make the point here that you can set this up with Jamf Pro. You can do whatever you want. I'm showing you the most simple example so that we can remember this. Next, let's look at content caching. So when it comes to content on iOS devices, iOS updates can be pretty big, so can apps, and some of the training books and manuals, they have videos and interactivity, they can be rather large too. And we're not going to be trying to move this stuff over Wi-Fi networks that might not exist or might be designed for something else and not for transferring huge amounts of data around. And that's important because we're going to be using tethering. Well, fortunately for us, our Macs have the ability to do content caching automatically. And if you go to the sharing preference pane, like the way I zoom that sharing like that, and you turn on content caching at the bottom there, what will happen is all the devices on the network will become aware that there's now this source that they can use to grab data from and instead of going up to the cloud. Anybody on the network can be feeding into this content cache. And you can set up the cache so you determine what type of data you want to store. And here I have it set for only shared content is what I'm going to be storing. In addition, the shared content could be software updates, it could be apps, it could be the iTunes store and iTunes U content, some of those big, heavy books that they have that are interactive. And if you want to control the aspects of the cache itself, you click the options button over there, and then you can set the location, the size, and you can even clear the cache with the reset. So everything you need is built into macOS. You don't have to go look for a solution or anything complex. You simply go to this one preference pane, you check one box, and you're pretty much done. That's our speed, right? Content caching. Next, let's look at what we have to do for setting up Apple Configurator to be a player in this whole attachment scenario. Basically, we have to do a couple things. We have to create a supervision identity, because the devices have to be supervised in order for us to manipulate them. So in the Apple Configurator preferences, you're going to click the category for organizations. And there's a plus button down there at the bottom. Make sure you see it. You're going to click that and then step your way through a process of creating identity. At this point, if you want to join device enrollment program, you can. I'm not going to do that for this example. We got a dozen iPads here. I don't need device enrollment and everything else. I'm going to manage these with my nice little Jamf Now account. I'm just going to ignore this for right now. If you want to use it later, fine. So I'm going to enter in the information about my supervision organization, and instead of importing an existing one, I'm going to create a new one. And then you're going to have to approve that because it's actually going to go in and write certificates and stuff. So if I click this, you can see that there's the Supervision Identity certificate created for you automatically. All you had to do was fill it in. And we're going to be using that supervision identity in the form of certificates in our workflow to represent us at key points in the workflow. And to do that, we're going to export that supervision identity as two certificates, a certificate and a private key. To do that, hey, there's the old gear at the bottom. There's always a gear at the bottom with Apple dialogues. For some reason, they just cannot put one up without a gear. So we're going to go to the gear. You're going to click on it. At the bottom, it says Export Supervision Identity. And then from the pop-up menu, you have two choices. You could export it as a single P12 file, which is an encrypted archive that contains all that data. Or you can export it in two files, which I have selected here. So when I export that, you're going to get a notice that says, hey, you're exporting this identity to two files that are open. You know what you're doing with this. It's good for automation. But it is going to be open. So what do you do with this? Well, here's a little tip. What I do on my machine, I created a little encrypted disk image, and I put them inside of that and then mount that when I'm using it as an attachment device machine. Pretty cool. It keeps them organized. I know where to go, and nobody can just walk up and copy them. So when we're done with that, we get our exported certificates. I know where they are. Then you have to install the automation tools that are part of Apple Configurator. And to do that, you simply go up to the application menu, choose Install Automation Tools. You get the wonderful dialog with the wonderful approval dialog that's in a different color. Interesting. And then you put in your password and install. And this is the interesting part. What gets installed is a command line utility called CFG util. And what's in this utility are all the commands that Configurator uses to communicate and talk to an iOS device. Suddenly, all of those tools are available for view. Hey, that's fun, but they're not exactly easy to use. Hence the library that Automator has. And we're going to approach these in a different way. But it's a very powerful utility that we're going to use over the course of time. So you've installed the automation tools. And then finally, we need to make a couple profiles for my example. To do that, you go to Configurator, File menu, and choose New Profile. And it has a little profile maker that has this type of profile and the parameters. And every profile that you create shares general information. So you're going to have the name of the profile, different identifiers, and different data about it. You basically fill out this stuff, and then you determine, do you want the profile to be always around? Do you want it to be removed automatically? Can it be taken away by the user after an interval or after installation? Fill that out yourself, and then you choose the type of profile. So we're going to choose a Wi-Fi profile, and then you click the button to create a profile. And then you fill this out. It's a simple profile that basically has, the service SSID, the name of your network. Is it hidden? Do you want it to auto-join? The basic information about it and the security type. Here I have it set for WPA2 personal. If you want to use the enterprise stuff, the interface will change and you might need some certificates to drag in there as well, whatever. But right now, for our example, I just have it set up in a personal Wi-Fi account. The password, and then we're basically done. Do you want this to be available? Yes. You save that as a mobile config file. And then the next profile we're going to make in the same way. This one, we're going to create a web clip. And a web clip is just like a little link to a URL in a browser. So we're going to select that, and the general information about that is pretty limited. It has a label and basically what is the URL. So what is our URL? Do you remember when we set up our wonderful Jamf Now, it gave us an auto-enrollment URL? That's where we put it in there. So the user never has to enter that. This is just going to be a little web clip. So we put that in there, and then we say we want it full screen so it actually looks cool. Save that, and we have both of our config files done. So that's our setup for Apple Configurator. Now, let's look at Automator, of creating our automation recipe for refreshing the device. Auto is so cool. Amazing technology, father of Siri workflows, Siri shortcuts. Everything you're going to need, I have waiting for you at configautomation.com. Look at the attached workflows link on the right-hand side, and you're going to download a little toolkit that contains all the files I'm going to show you. You can do that later. I'm going to walk you through exactly what each file is and how you use it. So, with Automator, the first thing you need to do in our new secure OS world is go to the application menu and choose third-party Automator actions. Excuse me. And then you're going to get this dialog. Do you want to enable the execution of third-party actions? And you're going to say yes. You're going to select the checkbox to say yes. And that's because I'm going to provide you with 6 or 7 custom Automator actions that enable this whole process to be very easy. Choose install, allow, and then we're going to go and create a new workflow. We're just going to use the standard workflow template. We're not going to do anything fancy. And now I'm going to add some actions. The first one is begin attachment workflow. Then erase devices, prepare devices, wait for activation, install profile on devices, and then end attachment workflow. So there's our workflow. Begin attachment workflow, erase devices, prepare devices, wait for activation, install profiles, and then end attachment workflow. And this runs from the top down automatically. So let me cover what these actions actually do. We're going to save this. Excuse me. I'm going to put this in the workflows folder in your library folder. Leave it named the default name that I have for your workflow file. You're going to call it attachment.workflow-workflow. And just put that in the home library workflows folder. It doesn't have to be there. It's just a good location that you know where everything is. Once you've saved it into that location, let's examine each action and see what it does. The first action is probably the most important. It enables this whole process to happen. So when you are using Apple Configurator in an attachment scenario, and you have a device, and you plug it in, this workflow is going to be triggered, and that first action will write a stub, which is a property list file, with the name ECID identifier of that device to a folder in the libraries folder. And this property list file contains information about the device that other actions in the workflow can go retrieve, like serial number, like device type, different information about that. During the process of processing or erasing or restoring an iOS device, it will disconnect and then reconnect back to the machine. That will trigger another execution of the workflow. But what happens is this action looks to see if there's already a stub. If there is a stub for that, it knows it was just disconnecting and ignores it. If there wasn't, it creates a stub. So this is your protector against re-entry problems or anything else. It will handle all of that for you automatically. And if you want to actually see the folder where things come in, it's fun to watch. You can click that reveal button and it will open up the folder for you, and you can watch the little stubs being created as the machine's processing stuff for you. And if you choose, you can add the serial number to the property list. The second thing this action does is it does kind of load balancing. Not actual load balancing, but something similar. So the USB bus on a Mac is not really designed to handle 20 devices simultaneously. So what this action does is kind of juggle them. So instead of having 20 devices simultaneously, you only have 5 at a time. And it handles all of that juggling for you by keeping everybody in the air. And so as long as you're only handling 5 USB devices, everything runs pretty good. And when those 5 are done, it pulls down some more until they're all done, and it has them all in the bag. So all of that's handled for you automatically with that action. The erase devices action that comes with Configurator, it just erases the device. There's nothing you need to do with that. If you're, for some reason, working with iOS 9 or earlier, you will need your Supervision Certificate for this. But for all modern iOS devices, you can just put this action in and it wipes the device. Next, we have our prepare devices. At the top, if you want to enroll in an MDM, advanced MDM, you could do that there with a URL, and you might need like a trust anchor certificate for that. We're not going to do that. We're using open enrollment, and we're doing it through a profile. Next, we're going to supervise the device, and that's important because we want to manage that. And in order to supervise the device, you'll need to identify yourself. And here's where our exported certificates come in. We take the certificate and we point to it off that pop-up right there. And that's our identity. That's our authority that's allowing this automation to execute. And then you can choose whether you want that device to be able to pair with another computer. You can turn that off if you want to. You can put your organization information in there. It's optional. And then you can choose what setup screens that the user is going to see. I leave them all off for here, but you can pick which ones that you want. And the most important thing is I advise you to set a language and a region. So set your locality from the pop-up menu there for what you're using. Don't make the user have to go through and choose English out of a whole long list of stuff. You can set all of that right there. So that's your supervision action. After it, there's a wait for activation action. So while the iOS device is absorbing all the supervision data, it runs a little cycle, and this action just waits for the activation to return so that the device goes, okay, I'm ready to proceed. It handles all of that waiting and pausing for you, no problem. And then finally, you can install profiles. And these are the profiles that we created. We use the little add button there underneath that list to install the 2 profiles that we created. And then we want those profiles to be installed without user interaction. And in order to do that, we have to show the workflow who we are. And to do that, we use both our certificates. Use the certificate and the private key. So this means that the workflow can execute with your authority. And that's pretty much with that. The last action is called End Attachment Workflow. It has one job: look for the stub and kill it. And that's pretty much it. So there's your whole Automator sample workflow. Again, this is totally flexible. You could change it to any actions you want, any of the actions you want. You can put your own customized stuff in there if you like. For the purposes of this example, I'm keeping it pretty simple and straight ahead. I'm erasing the device, and I'm supervising it, and I'm installing a couple profiles. Basic idea. So that's Automator. And that leaves us with the one thing that we have to do left, which is our TRC. What is a tether response chain? A tether response chain is the mechanism that launches upon attachment. So we'll need an attachment agent. Ooh, attachment agent. We'll need a command script. Ooh, command script. And we'll need an Automator workflow. Ooh, Automator workflow. So let's look at what this is about. So this is all possible because of one command in the CFG util. EXEC is the command. And what this command does is it executes a script upon attachment or detachment of a device. It's part of the CFG util that is at the core of Apple Configurator. And we're going to bypass the Apple Configurator app and talk to the utility, and we're going to execute this. We're going to sign up to have it automatically execute upon attachment or detachment. But be warned that this command doesn't have built-in reentry protection, it doesn't have threading, it doesn't have any of those kind of things. Hence those set of Automator actions that I created for you, right? So to use this from the command line would be nearly impossible. But it's as part of the structure, and it also, when it executes, passes all this information about the device and environment variables to the script that it executes. So it executes a shell script and passes all the information about the device that has just been attached. Interesting thing, each device gets its own execution of CFG util. So if you have 30 devices attached, 30 different instances, so they don't interact with each other. They're self-contained, doesn't cause problems. Using this strategy, there's two different types of workflows you can come up with. You can have a live terminal session that calls the command that then calls the workflow. Or you can do what we're going to do, which is create a launch agent which runs the command script, which then runs the workflow with the newly created instance of CFG util. And this is what we're going to do, and this is what the launch agent looks like. Ooh, launch agent. You see in cyan, there's 4 properties. Basically, keep alive, give it a label, that's your business identifier. Program arguments and run it load, true. So the one we're interested in is the program arguments. And if we unwrap that into a command, you can see that CFG util, there's our command exec-a, and this is the important thing. You need the path to the attachment command, and that involves the username. So you're going to go into this file and change the username to the username on the machine that you're using. That's all the customization you need to do. Make sure that the username matches the current user on your machine. You're going to save that and then put your launch agent in the launch agents folder in your home library. Now, here's a tip. If you also write 2 little shell scripts, these 2 shell scripts that talk to launch control, and you save those as shell scripts and put them in the scripts folder, excuse me, in the user library, they appear in the scripts menu, and you can turn off and on this whole attachment architecture on your machine. So you don't have to have that running all the time in case you forget and plug your phone into the computer, which I did the other day, and I had to recover from iCloud on the hotel network. So we're going to use this type of flow. Now, the command file is already done for you. You don't need to edit it, but I'll show you the important part of it. Here's the line that executes the Automator workflow using the command line tool Automator. And you can see in color there of key value, those are all the environment variables that will contain information about the device that's running. That gets passed to the workflow as a string. The first action, the begin attachment, takes that, expands that, turns it in, grabs the information about the device, writes it to the stub. The second thing that's important is, where is the workflow? So here is the primary location. If you put the workflow, the attachment dash workflow, in the workflows folder, this is genericized with a tilde, and the echo will expand it out to fit the automatic thing. So just put the attachment workflow I give you, or you create, put it in the workflows folder, name it that way, you're done, no editing. And that's the command. As far as the workflow goes, we just created that, so we already have that in place. And both of the workflows and the workflow file, the command and the workflow file go in the workflows folder, launch agents goes in the launch agents folder. And that's the setup that you have. That's your Tether response chain. Now we can actually look at what happens when you do this. So now that we've done all of our setup, we're ready to actually do this. So here's our computer. It's already set up. It has all our little files on it. I pull up an iOS device. I plug into the device and let it go. And so the first thing it does is we have it set for erasing. It's going to erase it. Then it's going to do the profiling and installing and everything. And then it looks like this. You get the hello. So you have multiple hello. There's our Wi-Fi profile kicking in. There's a EULA of some kind you have to approve and trust and stuff. And then you get advertising. I don't know a way to turn off the advertising with a basic profile, but I imagine you can otherwise. Lots of advertising, and welcome to the iPad, and there you are. Now we have our little link for enrollment. We open the link. It takes us right to the Jamf Now enrollment page. They enter the access code that I give them, and then they put in their name and enroll, and it says, do you want to allow this to happen? And then they go through a process of installing the profile for management. Yes, I click. Yes, I trust. Yes, I click. Yes, I trust. Yes, I click. We're teaching them how to tap. So then it's installed, and if I go back, you can see the updating happen. They'll send down there's the wallpaper. It just went down. So I'll turn it off to see the wallpaper, and I'll log back in to show you the desktop there as well. So to set up that device, it was just a matter of plugging it in. Again, I don't have it set for zero touch. If you want to go through that process and use an advanced enrollment with more profiles and stuff, you're fine. It will still work in this scenario as well. I'm showing you the most basic form so that you can easily remember it. But that's what it looks like when you actually attach a device. So your accidental administrator has their problem solved. Now, the other person who's going to be administering the computers, not the accidental administrator, but whether it's you or somebody else, you go to Jamf Now, you refresh your page, and there's your device. And if you click on it, you can set all the different parameters about that device that you want because you're in the wonderful Jamf Now program. And you can apply anything to it and do anything you want to it as well. So a different person could be handling that than the accidental administrator who's just charged with holding those devices. And what you get? Happiness from everybody. Everybody's contented. That's a good solution. Now, what about scalability? Can this be done on a professional level? Can the same concept be applied to like thousands of iPads, hundreds of iPads, pallets of iPads? Yes. Apple has a tool called the Apple Provisioning Utility, or APU, and it is a professional tool for doing this attachment scenario in shared devices. It's developed by the Professional Services Organization. There's an email to get to them if you're interested in this. And they're actually here on site, and they're presenting later on this afternoon, I think at like 4 o'clock. So what they've done is they've worked with customers around the globe, creating these type of scenarios in hospitals, in first responders, in retail scenarios, in all the different scenarios I described. They're using APU for mass deployment of this strategy. And the plug-in process is really a powerful tool. The Apple provisioning utility can batch process up to 40 devices off of one computer. So you can have one Mac Mini sitting there and have a cart with 40 devices, and it will handle them all. It has a dynamic dashboard interface, so you can see the status of any device at any time. You can see what's running and what's processing. And it requires minimal setup. You just create an automator workflow. And here's what it looks like, and I'm going to show you an actual run of the device. There's about 10 devices there. And the way that this often gets used for, like with retail, say you're in a store and you use an iOS device on the floor to sign up new clients and to answer information and provide that for them. You go in the back room, you look at the screen, you can see which devices are green and ready to go, and your cart might have a light on it that matches that as well. If it doesn't, then you can see one of the columns there is the slot number on the cart. So you can see, slot 4 is ready now. And the middle column is showing you what automator actions are currently running on the device. There's a column that shows you the percentage of processing that's completed. And this is basically doing an advanced wipe. This is doing a wipe restore and enrollment in Jamf Pro and making it a zero-touch configuration all in front of you right now. And it usually takes anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes per device. So they turn around as pretty quick with this tool. And this kind of strategy is really good because if you're the hospital scenario, the hospital staff can just have a room where there's a cart, they plug this in, and they can poke their head in the door and see, is anything green yet? If they have something that's green, they can take that device and then pass it to the patient. It's a perfect strategy for on-site application. You can see some of the devices are done now, and the dot is turning green. Again, this might match a lighting system on the cart where the light lights up for the cart as well. So we're just about done with 10 devices on one Mac, done basically by attaching. And we got one more. Come on, guy. Yep, it's all done. So that's an example of the Apple provisioning tool running. And I think they're showing that off later today, like around 4 o'clock. I have to check the schedule for that. So that's tethered management of iOS devices. It's a little scenario you can create yourself, keep in your back pocket. At some point, if you run into accidental administrators in your organization, you have the ultimate quick answer for setting up a Mac and say, hey, Bob, just plug it in. It'll take care of everything that you need to do. So to review, you're going to go to Config Automation. You're going to download the little toolkit I have there that has the workflow, the command, and the agent. And then you're going to use some MDM software. I don't know where you're going to get that, but I recommend Jamf now. It's really good. And remember, this has a flexible design. You don't have to use exactly what I showed you. You can change this. It's customizable. You can add in automated enrollment if you want to. It's all available to you. So the other thing is, this is a fun solution. It's important to remember to have fun with all this because you're really special people and very powerful. And thank you so much for being part of my day. Thank you.